You know all those chemicals and fertilizers you spread out over your lawns and gardens and farms? Yeah, they actually contribute to poisoning the environment. Because what happens is, when it rains, or when they leach into the groundwater, when they get into the aquatic creatures, when they get into any of the animals, or plants really, the extra nutrients and chemicals flow downstream to wherever the water ends up. A lake, a river, the ocean, and they feed the growth of both bacterial and plant algae. And in animals, when animals eat smaller animals, or with, up the food chain, the concentration of the chemical, particularly if it's a toxic chemical, this is particularly dangerous, accumulates. This is what bioaccumulation is, and that can just wreak havoc on the ecosystem. Now, some amount of and types of algae are all fine and good. That's usually the green algae you will see in small quantities. This algal bloom, however, is the rapid growth of a bacteria known as Karenia brevis. That is its scientific name. The ecology section of MicrobeWiki's page on this creature says, I will read its entry as of today. Karenia brevis, and that's italicized, and first name is, the first letter is capitalized, second name, it's all lowercase. That's how you write a scientific binomial name. Karenia brevis is a dinoflagellate which is found in the Gulf of Mexico along the coasts of Texas, Louisiana, Florida, and North Carolina. They are photosynthetic and perform much of the area's primary production. Because they require light, they cannot live at depths below 200 feet. Karenia brevis, that's Karenia, not Karina, Karenia brevis, has a temperature range between 4 and 33 degrees Celsius. However, their optimal range is 22 to 28 degrees Celsius. In addition, this organism can live in a salinity of between 25 to 45 parts per ppt, I think that means parts per trillion. While they are not symbiotic organisms, they do provide a great deal of oxygen to the environment, with one estimate stating they perform around 20% of the primary production in the West Florida shelf during blooms or red tides, as is shown in Figure 2. While researchers are unsure of the conditions necessary for these red tides, several hypotheses revolve around the species' requirements for metals. And a lot of the chemicals that's ending up in water are metals or have metals in them. Any more detail or specificity on exactly what is going on, I will have to do more research on. But that is pretty good information. So these are photosynthetic bacteria, which means they are producing oxygen. But it looks like they also produce a toxin. Again, I will look into this more. But there is currently a 150-mile spread of this Karenia brevis red tide that has so far killed a number of sea creatures. Huge numbers of fish, turtles, a manatee. Look, if you really care about sea life and the oceans, stop pouring chemicals and fertilizers all over the place, people who are doing that. It does end up in the large bodies of water, including the ocean, feeding algae that chokes and sometimes poisons the water, as we're clearly seeing here. I really wasn't able to find detail on what the toxin actually is. And if these are truly photosynthetic bacteria, then they should be producing oxygen, which is look like they do. This will require more study. I looked at a number of articles. Not a lot of them had a lot of detail, which is a problem. I will see when I go back to the Museum of Natural History if, let's see, on Monday, if they have more detailed or better articles on the subject. Now, the acidification and temperature rising concerns about the oceans and marine life, while real, are much more complicated problems to tackle. And they too will continue to require years of research and negotiation to figure out how to handle. You can't just force countries to change their approach to dealing with to either dealing with global warming or carbon dioxide production or fossil fuel burning. You can't just force change. This will take negotiation. But as a starting point, let's stop with the lawn and farm and garden chemicals outside of what's absolutely necessary, even though people's opinion on that may vary, but cutting down on the chemicals would be one huge step in the right direction. This particular type of bacteria, this Karenia brevis here, this is what it looks like under the microscope. It, exposure to it can cause, serious eye and respiratory damage to people. So you might want to stay out of the Gulf of Mexico waters until the red tide clears, or if you insist on swimming or going on vacation or entering the water, the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has a page which I will put a link to below that you can go to for advice. I will return at some point with more detail on this issue.